For all the people in this country's establishment institutions, especially the media, who continue to lie and pretend that Kamala Harris is not a DEI candidate, or worse, that anyone who calls her that is a racist, let's compare her to Barack Obama. I am choosing Obama because most woke liberals and their powerful institutional enablers have great difficulty ever comparing a black person to a white person unless the goal is to argue that the white person is lacking in some way. Now, whether you love him or hate him, Barack Obama did not become president because of Democratic politicians or establishment institutions believing in DEI, never mind practicing it, since none of them did that back then. And I don't mean that just literally, as in no one in the mainstream was using those terms back then. As a conceptual idea, our establishment institutions had not accepted what DEI actually stands for, which is rigging a system, be it school tests, college admissions, or choosing a political candidate to give members of preferred identity groups more power than they'd have if the choosing process wasn't being rigged in their favor. Like affirmative action or legacy admissions, the choosing process is being rigged by the institution or the person's choosing so that they get the individuals they prefer. Whether or not the person or persons are qualified is a secondary consideration. That is DEI, although its defenders will continue to try and gaslight the American citizens and insist that it is not. How do we know the truth? Well, one way is to notice that the pro-DEI narrative doesn't make sense, but requires you to pretend that it does. Ever since George Floyd, almost every major institution in this country has claimed DEI policies are wonderful and necessary, but at the same time, if you point out someone is a DEI hire, it's considered insulting. Why? Because it is insulting, no matter how much lying occurs. It's exactly like pointing out that someone got into college through a legacy admission. This is a point DEI supporters make all the time, but they only ever make it to try and justify the unfairness of affirmative action and DEI policies. But let's compare Kamala and Obama. How did Obama rise to power? First, he had to win the Democratic primary. And to do that, he had to compete against everyone who was eligible at the time, no matter their skin color or sex. Can the DEI supporters and its enablers even imagine such a thing? It only happened in 2008. Here are some of the people Obama had to compete against and beat in the 2008 Democratic primaries. White man John Edwards. White man Dennis Kucinich. White man Joe Biden. And most important of all, a white woman, Hillary Clinton. Hillary was the absolute frontrunner before Obama showed up. Is everyone starting to see the difference between a DEI candidate and someone who is not a DEI candidate? Back to Kamala. Who did Kamala compete against to get picked as a vice president? Well, we know whatever her qualifications, she wasn't competing against any men, since Biden made that very clear. Of course, this is overt sexism, but the establishment media was fine with it. Woke types and their powerful institutional enablers are all big believers in the principle that two intergenerational wrongs make a right. And we know that Kamala's pool of potential competition was reduced even further. Why? Because of George Floyd and other blacks who who wound up getting shot or killed by a white officer for resisting arrest. Some might say I'm exaggerating, but Democratic Representative James Clyburn said exactly that back then. After George Floyd's death, he said that Amy Klobuchar seemed a less likely choice for Biden. Biden denied that George Floyd's death would have anything to do with that, but that was early on. As for Amy Klobuchar herself, well, since she was fortunate enough to be born a woman, she had been one of the leading contenders for Biden's vice president in 2020. So she stayed silent on the topic for a couple of weeks. However, as BLM riots continued around the country, she read the writing on Biden's DEI wall and withdrew her name from consideration. Not only did she remove herself from competition, can you guess? Amy Klobuchar recommended Biden choose a woman of color. That's the difference. Kamala didn't beat Amy Klobuchar. She didn't even compete against her. Amy dropped out rather than compete with her. That would be like 2008's Hillary dropping out so that Obama could get the presidential nomination. Times were different way back in 2008. And then, of course, we know what happened when Biden was finally forced to drop out of the 2024 race, and it came time for the Democrats to choose a new presidential nominee. Obama had to defeat all those white men and a white woman. Who did Kamala have to compete against? Literally, no one at all. How could the DEI Democrats allow a black woman to compete against other people in the Democratic primary? How could the DEI-loving establishment media not support her? My goodness, if she were to lose the primary, then she might not be such a role model to young black girls everywhere. The truth is that Obama was a role model of what a black person can achieve without Democrats excluding all white females from the competition. Kamala is the exact opposite. She's a role model to young black girls of what they can achieve with Democrats rigging the system in their favor, which no doubt is something Democrats